This is Talk It Out, the Women's Agenda podcast. Tune in for your weekly download on the latest news, trends and ideas affecting your career or your business. Here's your host, Angela Priestley.
Hello and welcome to the Women's Agenda podcast. My name is Angela Priestley and I'm here in the studio, the Eagle Ways radio studio, with Georgie Dent, our contributing editor on Women's Agenda, and Tarla Lambert, our publisher on Women's Agenda. How are you both team back together again after a few weeks?
I know. How delightful.
Very good. I'm excellent, thank you.
Yes. Well, you might not be finding it so delightful after this conversation, Tarla. Well,
It's true. It's the perennial optimist.
yes. No, it should be delightful. So lots of things to cover today. We are talking about a couple of career issues. So we want to look at, should women be saying sorry for saying sorry, as we are often told to do? So I'll get into that. Also, leading into from that conversation into self-criticism potentially being a barrier to success at work. So we're going to pose those questions together, have a think about it and see what we all think. And finally, what next for women in the Australian Federal Parliament after a fairly diabolical year, which we'll get to, some suggestions, some solutions. I don't know what we'll have there, but I'm sure we'll come up with something interesting. So, and some of that comes off some actual suggestions from Sarah Hanson-Young in a podcast with The Guardian, which she talked about the idea of there being a cross-party caucus, which we're still trying to figure out what that means, but we might have some examples of how that's worked overseas and what that could potentially mean for Australia. But first of all, saying sorry. I am very good at saying sorry. I say it many times a day. Before coming in, I just ran a little search of my outbox where I had 10,000 messages, which is probably an issue in itself. But 1,000 of them contained the word sorry somewhere. So I don't know if that means I'm saying sorry in a tenth of my emails or not, or potentially, or maybe the emails are stacking up on top of each other and remembering where I've said sorry in chains. But anyway, I do say it a lot. I'm very much aware that I say it. And I don't know that I care that much. I used to. Anyway, so last week we had Meredith the Mentor writing a piece about this on Women's Agenda that ended up being one of the top stories for the week. And you can go and find that by searching Meredith on the website. And she also talked about the idea of trying to quit saying sorry and failing miserably. And she heard it from a career coach who said, as women, we need to stop saying sorry if we are going to break the glass ceiling. If only it were that easy, right? But it's so...
But yeah, see, I actually think it's one of those curious examples of creating another layer beneath the glass ceiling. I think that there are so many barriers already for women, and I think that the idea of putting another responsibility onto women to change something
about your behaviour that feels natural.
Because when you said before only 1,000 out of 10,000 of your emails had sorry in them, that actually surprised me, because I am quite sure that if you went through my outbox...
Oh, you'd be more than 10%.
I'd be probably closer to 100%.
Oh, okay.
Because, I don't even say that lightly. I think I say sorry probably every time I write back to someone's email, because I never write back within 10 seconds. But then, the thing that... because the other conversation that comes up is sorry and just.
Yes.
I just wanted to email to say this. And I have tried at different points, to take that language out. The reason that I don't is because it feels really inauthentic to me. Because when I say to somebody, if I'm asking them for something, I don't want to be abrupt and expecting of their time. I'm really conscious of the impact that my demands have on them. And so, and I'm conscious that if someone sent me an email and they were wanting a reply, 10 minutes later and they haven't got a reply until the next day, I don't walk around feeling horrendously, awfully guilty all the time about that. But I do think that in acknowledging that, perhaps I did take my time, or in acknowledging that I'm actually asking something of someone, I think that's not something I want to erase from my...
And I think
Tarla, do you think it's stopping Georgie from getting ahead?
No, I kind of agree with you. I've heard this advice before, and I did exactly the same thing, because, again, in emails, if there's even a slight delay in getting back to someone, your default position is to say, I'm so sorry, I've just been so busy. And I really did try to erase it, but it did sound so abrupt when I'd write these emails. And I also think that, like, I think that there's probably an aspect of it being a social construct where women do kind of fall into that trap. And I don't kind of take that away. I think we do need to be conscious of it, and especially where it is, you know, where we're trying to, you know, I guess we're acting differently to men, and we are taking on more responsibility than men would ever take in that kind of in those instances. But at the same time, I think that it actually is an example of empathy, and I have long been a believer that women probably are more empathetic at work. And we often talk about the confidence deficit, but I actually don't think it's a matter of confidence with women. I think it's that women are too empathetic. So they recognise and they, you know, issues that they might be putting onto other people or inconveniencing people in a way that men wouldn't.
Well, I think is that being too empathetic, or is that good being empathetic? I see that as being, maybe we could all use a little bit more empathy in business.
Exactly.
And maybe it needs to cross lines.
I also think it's not just empathy, but I also think it's awareness. It's having an awareness of what is going on for other people, what's happening in the. One of my daughters recently came home and sort of said that she was quite concerned that she wasn't, you know, keeping up with everybody with their reading. And obviously I was quite alarmed when she said this, because so I went and spoke to her teacher, and her teacher said, you know, there were absolutely no qualms. And she said, but it's funny, she's very aware of what other people are doing. She's like, there are some kids in the class who they would have no idea what reading level other kids are on, and that's fine because they don't need to. And I think that there probably is a case for calibration there, and that you don't want to be, you know, constantly tuned into what is everybody else is doing without, you know, regarding what you need to do. We've talked about this with email in particular. If I wanted to, I could sit at my computer and write back to emails for my whole working days, and I'd get absolutely nothing else done.
Well, yeah, because then people respond to your emails,
and then there's things. So I do.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not going to say that I'm going to spend my whole time answering emails. I'm not. I will say sorry sometimes if I think I'm late. I do say thank you for your patience often. If it's not something that is super urgent, but I've taken a week to get back, I will say that, because I want to acknowledge the delay, but I don't also want to take personal responsibility, and I do make sure that I don't. I feel guilt over lots of things, but email is not one of them.
Yeah.
Not anymore. I've got to the point where I just know it's not sustainable to do that. But I agree with you both that empathy is not necessarily something I think we need less of.
No.
I think it's quite a useful characteristic.
Yeah.
And
Maybe we need more men saying sorry.
Well, yes, exactly.
exactly. Or thinking, what am I asking of another person here? And because I don't know whether this is an example of sexism that I have internalized. When I do get asked to do something, or if someone asks me something, whether it's via an email or a message through LinkedIn, if it is really abrupt, I don't like it. And I do have to say, I probably get women asking me for things more often than I get men. So in my experience, these abrupt messages do come from women, and it irks me because I think I don't see any awareness in what you're asking here that you're putting a demand on me.
Yeah, and I always feel that with particularly pictures that come through, media pictures or press releases, or people who might write, I wait for your response when, you know, it's been emailed cold, and that automatically makes me feel off about the situation, and may actually mean that I won't actually reply, because I'm just feeling no sort of relationship, no sort of respect for each other's time in that. So,
but I think it's a weird tightrope as well, right? Because I actually really feel icky about those overly like effusive, gushy emails as well. Like I find them really inauthentic, and I think that women are susceptible to doing that as well. So it's like going the other way, where you become, you know, overly familiar and overly warm, and I think that that's disingenuous as well. So it's a tricky one, because
it is also probably worthwhile noting that given the line of work we're in, we do get a particular style of email a lot, which is probably, I think, where you're coming from, Tarla, when it is a press release, for example, and there is that sort of overly friendly language, that sometimes it can be uncomfortable. But I agreed. You know, I wasn't surprised that piece by Meredith did as well as it did, because I think it's an issue that a lot of women think about. We've been told to think about it. We've been told to, stop saying sorry. You say sorry so much. And then at the same time, when you try to stop doing that, when it feels like it's something that you're not doing it out of guilt so much as you're doing it out of a recognition of what is happening in a scenario.
And it actually feels more exhausting to have to try and stop doing it. So
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
what I found. And I mean, I've put out that advice there. I've interviewed women who've said that as part of their advice around, the ideas and tips for getting ahead. And we've shared that sort of content, that idea of, stop apologising for yourself, stop saying sorry, stop saying just, things like that. But at the same time, it is also just another, like you say, another layer where you just want to push back on that. And maybe it's also another excuse, because at the end of the day, there are structural issues that are the problem. It's not how women are using language, and telling women that they all have to use language a certain way, or, it goes back to that idea of saying that women have to do the power dressing and the pantsuit and a certain thing.
Yeah.
And that kind of relates to that too. So
Yeah.
I think that it is something that we should kind of push back that advice. I mean, we're obviously saying it in the context of email here, but it goes off more broader than that. And, some of the examples are when you say sorry for interrupting during a meeting. That's where it's like, well, I mean, what's happened there that somebody feels conditioned or socialised or something to have to say sorry? I kind of think it's fair enough saying sorry, because you might be interrupting, but it would be nice maybe if the types of people, if everyone was saying sorry at some point, or everyone feeling, that they are interrupting and acknowledging other people are speaking when they interrupt.
And accepting that as well, because I guess the problem with women doing that is that it kind of allows other leaders and people within that boardroom to look at them as though they are, doing something wrong, or they're not acting in a kind of leadership in a way that a leader would. So maybe just accepting that behaviour is fine as well, and that it should become the norm.
And I think really, reflecting on this entire conversation, I think Catherine Fox sort of got it right when she said we don't need to fix women. We need to fix the systems and the structures, because I do think that there's nothing innately wrong with women being wired to, I don't think we need to apologise for existing, which I think some of us actually do end up doing, but I think that we don't need to become obsessed with somehow modelling the language of other people, or modelling the leadership characteristics or the style of other people. I think we should, be able to succeed on our own independence. And
just as long as everyone is feeling that they can be their authentic self. And if that means that you're saying sorry in emails, then who the fuck cares really?
And if it means that you're not saying sorry, then who cares either?
Yeah.
So that's,
there we go.
that's it.
Okay, fix the system.
Bring on the abrupt emails or the gushing emails or the sorry emails.
Whatever
floats your boat. So next, so the next topic actually ties into that. So looking at self-criticism as a barrier to success at work, and we hear lots of anecdotal evidence of this, that women are obviously seriously hard on ourselves, that, this idea that we won't apply for jobs unless we're 100% qualified, that we don't think we deserve a pay rises, that we won't ask for what we deserve, etc. And I always say that, I feel often that the research is more limited than it's often put out that it is, because I think we're still yet to see really, really solid research and this is the case. But I know we certainly hear it anecdotally, and I hear it from my female friends. I'm not sure you might do too. But I did find a 2016 study of 4,000 employees who are using a 360-degree appraisal, when you get the full feedback. And what they found was that there was a significant difference between the way men and women were rating their own performances compared to that of how their peers were rating their performance. So it found that women tend to underestimate their abilities, while men were overrating their own performance relative to what their peers actually think. Then there's separate personality research that finds that those who overestimate their abilities are more likely to get into senior positions, which we can probably imagine does actually happen based on some of the people in senior positions we often meet day to day. So we had an interesting comment about our current Prime Minister and imposter syndrome prior to starting this podcast. And according to Dr. Richard Davidson, the self-criticism takes a toll on our minds and bodies. It can interfere with productivity and lead to illness and various other things. So we haven't actually kind of captured this all in a nice, convenient piece, but hopefully we will in the lead up to sharing this podcast. But I think there's lots of pieces of research to put together there. Tarla, do you feel that self-criticism has affected you in your career? Do you think it's affecting other women and more so than men?
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, I've always considered myself quite confident, but I think starting my career, I noticed that I was very much affected by imposter syndrome, and I still am. If I walk into an event that I'm meant to be speaking at, or I'm representing the business at, I feel like people are looking at me and maybe judging me and not taking me seriously at all times. And it's a really hard thing to overcome. I don't really know the method for doing that. You know, I try to, talk to a diversity of people, and I hope that I'm kind of getting over that a bit as well. But I think it's a very long struggle. And I suspect that a lot of women, and especially young women, do feel like that. What about you?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's always been I kind of wrote a book relating to this idea that I spent my whole 20s waiting for the right level of confidence before I felt that I could pursue various other things. So, yeah, definitely have felt that way. And I also think that I wonder if it'd be worse now, given social media, because I think that there is such an emphasis, even more so now. I'm in my 30s, and I kind of thought the body image idea, I just thought that would have disappeared by now. I thought I would have gotten over that. But it's almost like social media has kind of reinvigorated it, because you can't help but see these beautiful images of people all over the place. And maybe with magazines, I was never really that into some of the magazines that display a lot of stories on body image and stuff like that. So that never really hit me as hard, but it certainly hits me through social media. And you think about what that might be doing to younger women. I know that we've spoken about it previously, but how much of your day might end up being spent worrying or feeling anxious about that, and how much of your day spent trying to fix that or do something about it, and how it might be affecting you in other ways. And it's really, and I think it's also on men as well, this one, more so probably than it was a few years ago, more so than it was decades ago, definitely.
I mean, we know that social media is affecting the mental health of, a huge percentage of
everyone.
Australians, and I guess it's so discombobulating seeing people, living their best life on Instagram and going, oh, well, what am I doing? And
I think it comes out in, that's a living, it's like the travel thing, the body image thing, but also in a career context, especially around businesses and entrepreneurship. There is something really sexy about entrepreneurship that gets displayed out there on social media, particularly Instagram. And you wonder if the reality, because we see the stats then on how much money women are making from businesses. We see stats on how much money women are making how much people are investing in women's businesses, and it's really, really tough. And so I often think that might, morph the reality of what's actually occurring as well. It may also encourage people out of, really great professional careers with really great big employees that they're on a leadership path on, out of it as well. What do you think, Georgie?
I think definitely. I think for me, entrepreneurship is something that I've just never ever considered going down that path. So it's one of the rare areas I'm not vulnerable to feeling that, but I could definitely see that. I follow lots of amazing, women and men who've started businesses. And I do think that on Instagram particularly, that I think there is a gap between the picture that's being painted and the reality that we know is behind small businesses. I think that I struggled a lot with self-criticism early on in my life and career. I actually fell apart quite spectacularly at 25, which you know intimately about because you have read first draft of
coming
my
out
book.
in May 2019.
That's the one.
Yes.
And self-criticism was one big theme that sort of played into my anxiety. And it wasn't really until I was 25 and completely fell apart that I even became aware that there was any other way to talk to yourself. I just didn't even realise, it was quite the revelation for me at that age that I could actually tune into what I was actually telling myself and change it. And one of the benefits of the way that I got sick and fell apart was that I did actually make a lot of changes, and being really, really vigilant about not being critical was one of the big changes that I made, and it's probably something I need to revisit.
But how do you do that? I mean, what do you do day to day to stop being critical?
Really, it's really tuning in to what you are thinking and what you are feeling. So I actually messaged both of you, well, it was on our Slack messaging today, I messaged, but I was working at a cafe this morning and 3 women came in. They were all in their exercise gear. They were all very fit, healthy looking women, probably in their early 40s, I'd say. And they sat down and for 10 minutes they all discussed what they were going to eat and what their weight is. And one of them had just lost a kilo and she's 54 kilos and she really likes being 52 kilos. And we're talking really small body weights here. They talked for 10 minutes and I actually started to feel disgusting about myself. And that is ridiculous because I'm not overweight. I didn't walk into the cafe I wasn't thinking about my body image. I was thinking about my parenting, which is another area I fail in. But it was funny because I felt like the dialogue they had, it was so open about the fact that their weight is a really big issue in their life, and I just think, why? It's so depressing. But I wasn't at all sort of resentful or critical of them as individuals. But I think it is this narrative that we have that even when you're 40, as these women are, and even they all look fit and healthy, all of them I know because they talked about it, weigh less than 60 kilos. So we're talking small people here. And yet obviously so much energy and time went into that. And by sitting there absorbing it, I really did actually get myself into a headspace where I was suddenly thinking, oh my God, I really... Why? Yeah, but anyway, so this is the thing.
It's amazing how quickly that captures in your brain. You can see an image or something and you think, I've really got to get myself in order. I've really got to fix that. Or You know that thing when you see a bad photo of yourself? And you just suddenly feel like, well, actually, I didn't even think I had a problem. Every photo is one of those, but yeah.
Well, look, I feel the same, but sometimes something little can set you off in a spiral. And so what I was forced to learn to do when I sort of got particularly sick and in learning to take better care of myself, I did have to actually stop and think. So today in the cafe, before I started thinking that I've absorbed that conversation, I started to feel off. And I sort of suddenly felt a bit like insecure. And I was like, why am I feeling like this? I've got a lot of work to do because it's on deadline time for the newsletter. But it's sort of recognising, okay, hang on, why am I feeling this? Why am I suddenly doubting my physical appearance? And I'm like, okay, well, the conversation next to me has obviously infiltrated my mind and I've taken on that message and absorbed it and I don't feel like I'm coming out on top. And then sort of trying to be rational about it. Am I... But again, this is where body image is such a tricky thing because it's not logical.
No.
Because if it was, there's no way that women who weigh 55 kilos would be spending 10 minutes discussing their weight.
It's so sad that, so much time and energy is wasted on thinking about that.
Yeah.
Especially in the context of you might live 80 years or 80 to 100 years if you're lucky.
And I'm still going to be thinking about
you're going to be
in those later decades.
Well, I think that's what I was thinking because they went on to have they had a lovely catch up and I know a lot about their lives, but they all sort of have quite full lives from everything that they were talking about, from their parents, their husbands, their businesses, their kids. There was lots of stuff going on, and yet I was like, isn't it interesting that even at that age, their bodies, how they look and what they weigh is a headline act.
This is a commercial break for Work It Out. We'll be back in a moment. But if you're interested in being a sponsor for Work It Out or Women's Agenda, just drop us a line and let us know. That's womensagenda.com.au.
I had 2 revelations over the weekend. One was that I'm getting, the lines on your neck, and that was one of those things. I looked in the mirror and I just thought, okay, and I instantly noticed that, and I went and started Googling it. I lost myself, a good 20 minutes or so looking at what you do to fix this situation and how you need to sleep and et cetera. And a bit of an issue because I'm pregnant, so I can't actually sleep on, apparently, there's a way if you sleep on your back, you can stretch it out. I'm like, can't do that right now. Okay. So now every night I go to sleep and I'm worrying about something stupid like that. And I sat in front of the mirror, I was like, this is just not an additional thing I need to worry about. There is a lot going on that I'm concerned about. I feel anxious about that, that happen in your everyday lives as women. I really don't think I need to put this one on my list right now. So I've put it aside and dismissed it, thankfully. But and then the other one was that I think that sometimes part of the self-criticism comes from your perceptions of the reality that you think you will have as opposed to really the reality that you do have. And that happens, it definitely happens with work and how you think you will behave in a situation, but how you actually end up behaving, or how confident you might think you're going to be in the meeting, but how you might, stumble or stuff up and it doesn't work out as you thought it was going to be. And I think also it happens in parenting when especially with young kids, and I found myself raising my voice too often over the weekend in front of my kids. And I just thought, left thinking I'm just, the worst mother, etc., and all this sort of self-criticism that came in. I just thought, it's because I never imagined that is what I was going to be doing as a mother. You don't think that. That's not where you think you're going to go or where your life's going to go. But that is kind of the reality of dealing with kids, is that you're going to have tough days. It's going to be really difficult, and you're going to end up raising your voice more often than you would like. If you don't raise your voice and you have some ideas or some advice, please email me, get in contact. I'm desperate. But
I think that the expectation versus reality gap is really important. I know earlier this year I was talking to one of the school mums who I particularly love because she is also a child and family psychologist. So I like standing near her whenever I've got problems, which is always, and getting information from her. But I was saying to her how, we were in the middle of winter sport where, our eldest two daughters both had sort of netball and then soccer, and there was always a drive between, and the toddler would be, unhappy about getting in and out of the car and wanting various lollies at different points because there's always lollies on display at these sporting games. Anyway, I said to her, it just feels like these mornings are so stressful. And she said, well, they are stressful. You've got 3 kids. You've got to get across Sydney. There's horrific traffic. And I said to her, Nick and I aren't having fun. And she's like, that's not
Maybe
really...
take away the expectation.
That's not a fun activity.
Yeah.
And it was really true, because I think that I feel that a lot when we're having a stressful time, which is often when you've got little kids. I do think, oh my God, we obviously are doing this wrong. And it's like, well, no, actually, this is just there's a whole lot of grit in family life. And it's the same with careers. There's a whole lot of, for all of the glossy parts that we see of, executives' lives or entrepreneurs' lives, there's heaps of tough stuff with heaps of rejection, heaps of hostility and tensions and making mistakes. But that stuff isn't really what you see necessarily.
Yeah. And speaking of hostilities and tension and tough things going on, we'll get to our third topic. So we've only got a few more minutes.
It's the perfect segue.
It is the perfect segue. So we wanted to look at a little bit of what's next for women in Australian politics, well, in the federal parliament more specifically. But so we haven't heard, but a little tidbit that came out in The Guardian. They did a great podcast with Sarah Hanson-Young, the Green Senator Sarah Hanson-Young, over the weekend. And she's told them that it's time for a women's caucus in federal parliament that crosses party lines. And she said that there are apparently talks underway to actually make this happen. A little quote from her is that she says, I think we need to put down our bows and arrows politically and say women deserve a voice in this parliament from all parties, from all sides of politics, because when we work together, we do a really good job. And she added that after a decade, she's seen that women engage in a way that's different to men. And her comments come after, 2018, which might become known as the year that a lack of women's representation in government kind of really came to the fore and really started to look like the problem that it is. So obviously we saw that former Deputy Liberal leader Julie Bishop, just achieved a tiny amount of votes in that leadership spill vote back in August. We've more recently seen Liberal MP Julia Banks quitting the party for the crossbench, talking about the bullying that she's seen, and talking about how it currently women's representation as well, and also a number of just sexist and horrific comments being made in Parliament, and a couple of them against Sarah Hanson-Young particularly. So, Georgie, I mean, what would a women's caucus, what would that actually look like? What could it achieve?
Well, I think what it would look like is a question I'm not equipped to answer, because I think we haven't had a women's caucus before. What we have had before, and what I imagine that she might be referring to, is where we've had bipartisan parliamentary groups that work on issues that are sort of seen as being, above politics, in the sense that the party lines shouldn't be the determinant of the policy necessarily. And I think that 2018 has been a very unique year in politics for exactly that reason. I think we are seeing the issue of the representation of women coming to the fore in a way it hasn't previously. And I think that there is no denying that sexual harassment, for example, and sexism have been issues for every single party, big, small, left, right. You know, it's not a political problem or a partisan problem. It's actually a problem of men's behaviour, if we're going to be honest. And I've seen that tweeted before, and it's actually the truth. And I think that there is sort of merit. I think we've also got an unusual and unique group of women now on the crossbench. We've had, obviously, Karen Phelps has been elected in. We've had, for a little while, there's been Cathy McGowan. We've also had Julia Banks now join the crossbench. And it's funny, even just watching the photos from the last few days.
I love the photos.
It's different, isn't it? Because there's colour for a start, because they're wearing different things. There's different, you've got different ages, different backgrounds, and they're coming together. And I think, you know, we've had this conversation so many times. Experience isn't everything in terms of, you know, it is possible for a man to have awareness of a woman's issue. But what we haven't had in Parliament is very many women with lived experience on particular issues coming together to make policies to improve that. And I think that if, you know, we saw this in 2013 when the US government had its sort of fairly horrific shutdown, and there was no government supply for 16 days. It was women, senators and Congress women, who came together who actually solved that. And they did that, and they spoke about it afterwards by the fact that they sort of said, right, they basically left the main room where all of the big decision makers were, went off to a side room and said, right, this is the problem. How can we solve it? What do you need? What do you need? You know, and again, I don't for a minute want to put any pressure on women in politics to be particularly extraordinary. I think they should be just as ordinary or terrible as the male politicians are. But I think we do know women are good at working together and looking at issues a bit differently and thinking, is there another way we can come together here? I mean, Linda Burney, the Labor MP, she gave a terrific speech recently where she said, in terms of giving recognition to an Indigenous voice in Parliament, she's like, I want to work with the government, but I'm not going to stop the government from me pursuing, you know, a line of action here. And I think that's what potentially a women's caucus could do, with women coming together to say, what are the sorts of things that we're seeing as problems, and what can we possibly do with the power that we have to progress?
Would they be looking at women's issues?
Well, they might be, but I mean, I think also things like, and we've already seen this from the action on the crossbench, you know, I mean, the issue of the children on Nauru, I wouldn't say that's a women's issue, I'd say it's a human issue, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was the sort of issue that they might think that they would approach when there's been a stalemate and there's nothing substantive is being achieved. I mean, I wonder all sorts of things that they could potentially consider. And then even if they don't on their own, you know, they wouldn't.
But it's one thing to support that as a crossbencher, but it's a very much more difficult to. I know that Julia Banks did support it, didn't she, from the backbench when she went to the backbench.
But she was already on her way out. Like, you know, she was in a different position.
Yeah, but I think also I wonder whether if there is a women's caucus and there's power in those numbers, then even if they can't push, even if they can't on their own affect that change, they might be able to persuade their parties in a particular direction. They also might be able to have, I mean, I think that there's as much as, and there was a report in Fairfax on the weekend by Peter Hartcher that sort of showed the extent to which the government wanted to shut down Julia Banks. They didn't want her to talk. They didn't want her to leave the party. Unfortunately, they didn't care enough about her to actually go and sit down with her and see what might help. But they did offer her different things to make her go away. I think even if a women's caucus did nothing except bring the issues that are problems that aren't being discussed to the table, that would be substantive in itself.
Yeah, because I mean that's what's happening at the moment anyway. And I think it's easy to look at this year and go, God, it's been god awful with so many things that have happened, and you know, sexist slurs and sexual harassment allegations, and you know, there's been so many things. But at the same time, I think that this would have happened in every single year as well, except this year is the year that we are finally calling it out. And that's really exciting as well. And it's unprecedented that hasn't happened. So, you know, to consolidate that and to create a women's caucus where, you know, it can cross party lines and women can come together to talk about these issues and to enact change, hopefully, is, I think, really, really great. I think it will be a while till we know exactly what that looks like. But, yeah, no, I applaud Sarah Hanson-Young for coming forward with that, and I applaud the women that will surely get on board with that, because I think it's happened in isolated groups already. You know, you saw the Liberal Women's WhatsApp group and things like that. You know, there are movements everywhere, and now it's just about consolidating that and making it a bigger thing, and until we actually can sort stuff out.
Yeah, I agree. I do agree with that wholeheartedly. I do think that the issue is not that wild sort of sexism and sexual harassment has only just started to occur. I think you're right. It just has not been spoken about previously, and that's a change. And I also think, I mean, we've said this before, but if you ever sort of needed proof that maybe the men aren't that good at being in charge, let's just take a look of 2018 and think, you know, could you possibly just step aside just for a moment? I mean, is there anyone down in Canberra, think about it, the way these men are behaving, it is just, they're like toddlers, worse than my toddler.
It's
My toddler
worse than
is
that.
fairly peak into her tantrums, and they are doing a better job than she is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I often
so
think
just-
about that. Some of the comments, particularly about being made about climate change and students protesting climate change, and just the idiocy of that, and it's just the lack of understanding and grasping of the basic issues, or just denying absolute science. And
Manus Nauru, I mean, this year's been...
So we should wrap up, but we'll just finish up on recommendations for the week. Tarla, what are you reading or watching or listening to?
Okay, so this is incredibly belated, and I should probably not be so excited by this, because I know that, you know, thousands of people globally have been talking about this. But I went and saw A Star Is Born a couple of weeks ago, and it is the best movie I've seen in about 5 years. So I was not expecting...
Big recommendation, okay.
I was not expecting Lady Gaga to be able to act so well. And I walked out of there bawling. And if I listen to that song, I am still bawling. It is so, so good.
Well,
That sounds good. We only go to the movies roughly once a year, and I've said that.
that was going to be my movie for the year, but then the Freddie Mercury one came out, so
that's
I'm
also
lost.
meant to be amazing.
Yes, so I will find a way to see both.
Yeah, well, we haven't got to a movie yet, and as my eldest daughter keeps saying, she's like, "You and Daddy haven't even been to the movies, and the year is nearly up."
Well, this is
I was
my
like,
first movie of the year, so
maybe
maybe
I
that's
should-
why that's my best one.
That could be right.
It is the only one I've seen in 5 years, but the best. So,
I've watched a lot of Netflix Christmas movies, if that makes a difference.
so Georgie,
Look, my recommendation, and I've got to confess that I am only one episode into it, but Collateral, which is another British political thriller, cop thriller. Carrie Mulligan is really good. Anyway, I really, really like it, so I'd recommend that.
great.
Collateral.
Netflix.
yeah.
Nice. Okay. Well,
You?
mine is, and maybe I'm behind on this as well. I'm feeling self-conscious about this because I wouldn't have said that was behind Tarla. So
Oh, really?
I was
I
expecting
feel like it's
something
been
from
out
years
for
ago.
weeks.
But so mine is so it's called The Bold Type on Stan, and it's about a group of millennial women friends. Basically, they're working on this New York fashion magazine called Scarlet. And it's very easy watching. It's sort of drama / comedy, just perfect thing to put on when you're just over the day and ready to just sit and watch your iPad on bed or whatever screen you use at that point. But I really like it. It's kind of been described as like a feminist remake of The Devil Wears Prada. Everyone's really supportive of each other. The relationships really do come second to trying to get ahead in the career stories that are going on. The editor-in-chief is not like Miranda Priestley in The Devil Wears Prada. She's this really, wonderful woman who is really genuinely cares about the people who work for her and does all she can to help them. At least that's what I'm only about 4 episodes in, so I hope she doesn't turn on me. Otherwise, that would be terrible. But I'm just really enjoying it. There's 2 seasons out at the moment, and I read yesterday in Junkie that one of the leads, so Aisha D, I think her name is, she was in The Saddle Club. So she is Australian. So there you go.
Hey,
And
good to know.
Melora Hardin, I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, but she's the editor-in-chief, and she's the one who I've been watching the whole time and thinking, where do I know her from? She played Jan in the American version of The Office. So
There we
The
go.
Bold Type, that's my recommendation.
Awesome.
Good
Okay, I
answer.
like it.
So thank you, Georgie. Thank you, Tarla. And thank you to Eagle Waves Radio for having us again. And just a reminder that we publish every day and we put out a newsletter just before lunchtime where we feature our latest stories. So you can subscribe to that for free at womensagenda.com.au. Thank you.
That's a wrap for Talk It Out, the Women's Agenda podcast, powered by Eagle Waves Radio. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and jump on the website for more amazing shows. Catch you next time.